Okay. So I think what we're just gonna do is I'm just gonna place this face down, and I'm gonna get into my questions. So I have a list of 10 questions. Some of the first four or so are kind of like introduce yourself because that's just the way she wanted us to do it. Okay, so what is your name?
Okay, my name is Scott Henderson. I'm a professor of education at Furman University. I'm starting my 33rd year teaching, and I taught on the secondary level. I was a middle school social studies teacher.
All right. Have you taught anywhere else? Like, where have you taught?
I have taught in Virginia, New York, Japan, and here in South Carolina.
Alrighty. Have you taught any subjects outside of obviously being a social studies teacher and a professor? Have you taught anything outside of those spheres?
I have taught um, social studies, a variety of courses. I've taught English,
Okay.
and then I've taught a variety of education courses and history courses on the college level.
Okay. Um, in what ways do your interactions with yeah, it's on. Oh. Um, in what ways do your interactions with boys and your interactions with girls in the classroom differ?
Are you speaking of?
At the I should preface this at the middle school level specifically at the secondary level.
Okay, so when I was teaching middle school,
Mm-hmm.
um, I taught seventh and ninth grade, and the only real difference in the way I treated boys versus girls, at least in seventh grade, had more to do with the way in which boys and girls behaved differently at that age. So, the long story short, boys are much less emotionally or socially mature at that age. They therefore act out, misbehave more often. So I was often more likely to be reprimanding or correcting boys rather than girls. Seventh grade is approximately ages 12, 13-ish. My ninth graders, that difference in development had diminished greatly, and I would say that I did not, in any appreciable way, treat boys and girls differently at that age.
Alrighty. Um, some research suggests that teachers tend to view boys more negatively than girls in the classroom. In what ways have your experiences supported or opposed this hypothesis?
Well, following up actually on what I just said, it's possible that at, at certain developmental points where boys are less mature than girls, that at those points, which would be pre-early adolescence, that may be a reason for some teachers to view boys as negatively. I think a more general reason, if in fact it is a significant view held by teachers, in other words, if in fact there tends to be a less favorable view of boys on the K-12 level, it may have to do with the way boys are socialized that creates a disincentive to be academically successful. So, in other words, it's not cool to do well in school. So, boys are happy to comply with uh, uh, not doing something that would make them uncool. And I think it's very difficult for teachers not to feel some greater affinity for students who at least try to be successful academically, than they do with students who put much less or no effort into being successful.
All right. Now, one study that I read suggests that how rigidly boys and girls adhere to their respective traditional gender norms is correlated with how successful they are in the classroom. So, in essence, like, slightly effeminate men do better than, like, super masculine,
Huh.
toxic, I would call them toxically masculine men. And then, like, more, like, girls are kind of a different story, but that's kind of like the general thought. So, how have you seen or not seen this hypothesis in your experience?
Well, so in some ways that connects to my last response.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a society that sends different messages
Mm-hmm.
to boys, men, than it does to girls, women.
Mm-hmm.
The messages that are sent to most boys through mass media, popular culture, and through peer groups is that it is not, I hate to use the word cool because that's so old anyway, but a shortcut to popularity among boys is not to do, it's not doing well in school. That's not a quick way to become popular. The extent then to which a boy does or does not adhere to or internalize that is the extent to which that boy will or will not be more likely to be academically successful. Now, I did not. I have a twin brother, and the message that was sent to us was counter that message.
Mm-hmm.
So we did not adhere to the sort of socialized norms. But I will add that, and I can't, in thinking about this interview, I really can't be entirely clear on this, but I want to think that message about not doing well in school, that was not as explicit in terms of boy culture back in the day as it is now.
Mm.
With the understanding that I just celebrated my 40th high school reunion. So it's been 40 years since I was in high school. Even longer, 50 since. So let's just move on to the next question.
In your experience, how does class composition, that is, how many boys versus how many girls, whether it be completely single gender classes, whether it's skewed one way or the other, how has that impacted students' academic success?
So on the K-12 level, I've never taught single gender classes. I did teach some classes with slightly more gender than the other.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I saw any real appreciable differences in terms of behavior or academics. There is a little research done on this subject, and what the research indicates is when girls are separated by themselves, they do better. When boys are separated by themselves, they do worse. So what one conclusion from that is the presence of girls enhances the academic success of both other girls and boys, but that all boy classes have the opposite effect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the college level, I have just the way things fell out. I have taught a few classes with all women because education is so skewed, but I've seen no difference in that.
All right.
We're still good?
Yeah, we're still good.
Okay.
In what ways did your experiences teaching in Japan differ from those you had teaching in America, especially with regards to students' genders?
Well, so that gets a little I'll try not to make it complicated. I taught on the junior college level all women in Japan.
Oh, okay.
So I can't speak. Well, I actually taught very briefly at a high school. So it's Japanese culture is very different. Teachers get enormous amount of respect. I did find the ability of both boys and girls, and also my junior college women, their maturity level was a bit lower than what we would anticipate from someone from the West.
Really?
When I would say hello to some of my Japanese junior college students in the hallway or in the cafeteria we used, they would often giggle and kind of scurry away, which is not what a typical 18, 19, 20-year-old would do. I mean, that's never happened to me at Furman.
Yeah. And the final question, in what ways have your experiences as a professor differ from those you had teaching at the secondary level, especially in regards to gender?
Oh. Yeah. Do we have another year? Well, I guess the quickest way to answer that, or the answer that would make the most sense in terms of gender, is that I can confirm that we're living in an era, in a moment in American history where, as a general rule, girls, adolescent females, and adult young women are outperforming males in almost every regard. And I have seen that replicated here. Again, my classes typically have far more females than males, and therefore they're not representative of that. And I don't know if I would see that now on the secondary level or not also, but that is what immediately comes to mind as the biggest difference.
Now I'm going to indulge here. If you had to guess, and obviously this is going to be a super complicated answer because, but if you had to guess, why is that the case? That girls are just walking boys.
That is. I think there are countless people trying to get to the bottom of that, because it is demonstrable and it's nationwide. And about all I've been able to discern from the research is that, again, it has to do with a couple things. One is the playing field is now equal, as opposed to when I was your age, when it was just beginning to get level. But it is now completely level. So boys and young men now have competition in ways they didn't before. And then the second, I don't want to beat this drum to death, to mix a metaphor. We send very clear messages to boys about how you are not a real guy, a true guy. It is somehow it impugns your masculinity if you do well academically. And so I think between the fact that we've leveled the playing field and that boys get a very different message, that is resulting in a kind of self-selection, if you will, an elective mediocrity. I do not believe there are significant academic, cognitive, or intellectual differences between males and females. So it's not that. And I will, that I am absolutely certain of. And I thought that's sort of the question you would probably lead with was, are girls smarter in this and boys smarter than that? And I mean, not that you would have done your head that way. But no, I don't believe in that at all.
So you would argue that the academic gap itself is not caused by here, it's caused by...
Yes.
Okay.
That was perfect. It's not here, it's out there. Oh, yes.
Right. Okay.
And Dr. DeYoung and I sort of disagree a tad bit on that, but that's okay.
I mean, just to indulge, the stuff I've read says that it's not so much that one thinks better than the other. It's just from what I've read, it seems we think in different ways, if that makes sense. Like, and even that, there is some. The research on that is a little, but but yeah, that doesn't explain like why boys are doing significantly worse in school. It's more just like if you give boys and girls the same problem, on average they might attack it differently. But in terms of who's going to get the right answer more often, it should be about the same.
Right. So here's the example I would give.
Mm-hmm.
There are only two areas in which we have been able to discern any, it's very small, any real cognitive differences, and they occur very early in life. One is boys typically acquire verbal communication, speech, slightly later than girls.
Mm-hmm.
So the speech window is 18 to 24 months, and boys tend to be a bit clumped a bit further toward the 24 months. The second and only other area is in what's called logical spatial relations. At around the age of 4, boys show a slightly, again, this is a very small difference, in the ability to perform, and of course these would have to be with manipulatives, and I mean they're not doing calculus problems. But what happens is that over time, if you assume those differences mean absolutely girls are better at reading, boys are better at, of course reading is not the same as speaking, but at language, and boys are better at math, it would be like from the minute, say I have a 2-year-old and a boy and a 2-year-old girl. Well, if I put the girl in the kitchen and brought her up to be an expert in the kitchen, and the boy I took out in the garage and assumed that he would, that's where his aptitude was, then by the time they got to be your age, there would be marked differences. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, what I argue is that those differences are real, but they're not because of what's in here. Mm-hmm. It's how we took those tiny differences and blew them out of proportion. And
okay.
And so that's really not original with me. So that's the thesis of that book. Mm. And she just published an article last spring that says in the 20 years or 15 years since that book came out, she hasn't seen any, and she's a neurologist, hasn't seen any differences. But anyway, it's up to you to come to your own conclusions in your group, and I'm just obviously giving you my perspective, and Dr. Young has one. You'll read different perspectives elsewhere.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this. I cannot thank you enough because you quite frankly saved our project.
Oh, no, absolutely.
So I'm just going to